Hello and welcome to Who Would Win in a Fight. Today I'd like to touch on both of the Alvarez Golovkin fights. Now, as with everything, there's a lot of controversy around both these fights. And in my honest opinion, I think a lot of the controversy is just controversy for controversy's sake. The first fight, a lot of people called it a robbery. Golovkin should have won. Now, watching it live, hand on heart, my honest opinion was that the first 3 rounds, Alvarez won. And this is mainly based, my belief, on the fact that the first 3 rounds, Golovkin seemed to be a guy who was starstruck, not necessarily at Alvarez, but he was in awe. He just spent a lot of time looking up at the sun, moon and stars, kind of amazed at the situation he'd gotten himself into. It was by far the biggest stage he'd ever fought on. And I think it took him a couple of rounds to adjust to such a highly climatized arena. Now, so in my eyes, Alvarez won the first 3 rounds. Now, from rounds 4 to 9, I have Golovkin shading most of those rounds. You could make an argument maybe one or two of the rounds are very hard to score. You could give them to Alvarez, but we'll say for argument's sake, the bulk of the middle rounds probably all went to Golovkin. He had settled into his routine at this stage. At no point of the fight did he dominate Alvarez. So I think everyone kind of knew going into the last 3 rounds that Alvarez was, to all rational people viewing the fight, that he would be behind. Now, so we come to the last 3 rounds, rounds 10, 11 and 12. I think at a very minimum, Alvarez won 2 of the last 3 rounds. I have no question in my mind. I think he showed a lot more urgency. He coasted, again, old habits die hard. I think he coasted a little bit. It was a mix of him coasting in the middle rounds and Golovkin finally getting his feet under the table, finally establishing himself in the fight, getting the grips with Alvarez. And remember, I think what both fights show is that maybe Golovkin was a little bit overrated, but also what it shows is that how good a level Alvarez is operating at. I've been a fan of Alvarez for a long time. I think people thought there was controversy when he beat Austin Trout. I think he beat him fair and square. I think it was, it wasn't a comfortable victory, but I think it merited the decision it got. And the same thing with Israel Andy Lara. I think Alvarez deserved the victory as well. A lot of people think he stole it. I don't think so at all. So I've been a big fan of Alvarez, and I always had a slight question over how good he was, not just in terms of technique, because he's got good technical ability, but there was always the caveat to his career was he's always kind of maybe fought guys who were at a minimum one or two weight classes below him. So finally against Golovkin, he was in against a guy who was a true middleweight, and Alvarez probably is a true middleweight as well, even though some fight nights he's rehydrated over to 170 pounds, so technically he's a light heavyweight. So I think the middle rounds, Golovkin snuck most of them, and the last 3 rounds in the first fight, I think Alvarez won at least 2 of 3 rounds. So in my humble opinion, Alvarez took the first 3 rounds, and he took at least 2 of the last 3 rounds. So at a very minimum, the fight is 7-5 to Golovkin. That's not a robbery. If some people, I think Golovkin at best won 7-5. So if the decision goes to Alvarez, it's not a daylight robbery that a lot of people are making out. Now, when we also factor in the middle rounds and how some of them were quite close, there wasn't much in them, it would be very easy to see one of those rounds go to Alvarez. So it goes from a 7-5 to a 6-6 in a heartbeat. And again, I don't think, in my eyes, there's no controversy. I think the decision was probably, I wouldn't argue with it too much. Now, hand on heart, I actually scored it that night. I gave it to Golovkin by a point. But I can totally see how the fight ended up being a draw. So then, a couple of months later, actually it was a year later, come to the second fight. Now again, it had one of those unique attributes to some fights where it was actually so good, it kind of got a bit boring. You knew what was coming with every round. Both fighters, there wasn't so much of a feeling out process at this stage. Both fighters knew each other well. And already from the first fight, we'd established that, okay, on top of all of Alvarez's, all the stardust being put down on top of him, on top of all the technical ability he has, he's a tough guy and he's got a good chin. And he was never really seriously wobbled against Golovkin in the first fight. And this is where the second fight unfolded. Now, a lot of the fights, again, were hard to score. And it was very, very close to being a draw. But again, I have no problem with Alvarez being announced the winner, because I think Golovkin may have technically shaded a boxing match, just about. But I actually think Alvarez won the fight. I think he threw the more menacing punches. I think the punch stats show Golovkin threw more. He never troubled Alvarez once. Alvarez stood up to all these punches, and I think Alvarez looked like a guy under the pressure of the being tainted with the allegations. Well, the true allegations, if that's not an oxymoron, of being a drugs cheat. I think with the clenbuterol being thrown into the mix and the failed drugs test, I think Alvarez had an awful lot to prove. I think he had to prove, most notably to himself and to everyone, that his career just wasn't based on the chance that he was running cycles of steroids and clenbuterol. So I think he really had to go out on the front foot, not like his usual style where he's very good on the counter-attack. I think he really had to go out on the front foot, and a lot of times he pushed Golovkin back. And I think, push comes to shove, was the fight a draw? I wouldn't argue against it. But in the essence of what the fight was and what we wanted the fight to be, I think the boxing match was a draw. But I would score the fight to Alvarez. So again, a lot of people got wrapped up in the whole controversy thing. Look, that's what YouTube and all these social media outlets thrive on, is controversy. If there's no controversy, no one comments, no one watches, no one's interested. So again, in some ways it's a necessary evil. But the first fight, I'd have no problem with the draw. And the second fight, again, I've no problem with Alvarez. And in a future video, I'm going to touch on basically, if Golovkin and Alvarez don't fight again, where will Alvarez go? What's his next move going to be? So thanks very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.